Crystal Comet is a cooperative and competitive shoot-'em-up that releases today, April 24th, 2024, on the PC, specifically Steam, for the price of $9.99. It has you taking control of one of 4 pilots, fighting through waves of enemies and working your way to the mysterious Crystal Comet, which has had legends grown about it and could be the key to a wonderful life. Or not. But before I begin this dive into the game, this key was obtained from the developer for review purposes. That won't change my opinion of the game in the end, but you should know that because of FTC guidelines, as well as the whole morals thing, you know? For the purposes of this review, I will be showing you a sample run of the story mode of the game. I will cut it here and there, but this will give you an idea of the main mode of the game, at least at first. You do unlock additional modes and characters in the sort of random mode. You do get a selection of 1 of 4 characters at the start, and you can play this multiplayer or on Steam's remote play with other players. For the purposes of this review, I played by myself. I chose the robot, and I'll show exactly why in a bit. The game gives you a basic story of a bunch of planets and a bunch of races coming together. Everything's great, they are getting along, and then all of a sudden this Crystal Comet shows up. This Crystal Comet starts to cause some problems between the different factions because they all want it for some reason, whether it's, a symbol from God that they believe it is to be worshipped, or whether it is something that they can sell to the highest bidder. Your characters are a part of a group that was sort of commissioned by the UN of this game to take care of the problem, because obviously it's causing chaos, it's causing a bunch of issues, and thus all 4 of you are to set out and take care of the comet. And you do that by going to the different worlds, getting through them, and then going to the next one. The mission progression is very much like Star Fox, aka you choose a planet to start off with, and you go through it, and then you get branching paths. The branching paths may give you different weapons or different storylines within the different characters here, whether it's the robot's homeworld or the sort of mercenaries' homeworld. Which leads us into the gameplay, which is why you would be here in the first place. The story, it's bare bones, it's there's some lore, but you're here for the shooting. If you haven't played a top-down shooter or a shmup, it's simple. You shoot the enemies, and you do this with a controller. This game does not support keyboard and mouse. You need to play it with a controller. The game does warn you in terms of not only buying, but when you launch it, which is the first time I've seen that little pop-up after you launch the game, which is nice. The object of the game is, of course, to destroy everything on screen and to get to the end of the level without taking critical damage. Although you can be revived by your teammates if that happens. Regardless, your main weapon is a simple shot that can go in any of the 360 degrees around your character via the right analog stick on the controller. Now, you do have a secondary primary attack. I know that sounds weird, but it's basically a charge attack that has its own timer that you can fire in front of you. As you can see with my character here, he does a little blue laser that's a little bit thicker than the regular one. Now, that only goes in front of you, so if it's something behind you or to the left or right, tough shit. And so you have to position yourself in this case appropriately. But there's also your super attack that is based off of energy. Energy is used for dodge moves, it's used for something like this. You saw the little laser that went around my character there, that's my ultimate attack. And it costs 2 bars of energy, and energy is re-established through batteries on the screen that you can pick up. You also have sort of a speed up move where you can go through things very quickly, pressing the A button. I'm going to be honest with you, I hardly used it. You have enough speed with your main character. Maybe if I played as one of the slower characters, that would come more into play. But even then, I felt like I was fast enough to deal with anything that was being thrown at me. Now, you can dodge from one side of the screen to another. So I can go to the right side and come across to the left side of the screen, which is useful in certain battles, but again, that does cost energy, so you have to manage that appropriately. As I face this first boss here, I want to give a general impression of the gameplay as a whole. The game is serviceable in terms of a multiplayer-focused game that you can play with your friends. This is the quintessential beat-em-up type game, like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Turtles in Time, where you get a bunch of people together, you all have fun firing at things. Sort of. The thing about Crystal Comet, at least in my opinion, is that its difficulty isn't there. Part of that has to do with the fact that you have 4 characters on screen, all with supers, all with the ability to shoot in any direction, and the fact of the matter is, you just have overwhelming firepower against the enemies. As you can see here, yes, they are spawning enemies, but certain attacks and certain abilities are a little bit too powerful. My ability that I'm using right now, that sort of laser around at me, I can use that so often and take out so many enemies with that alone that it just sort of clears a third or a half of the screen at that point in non-boss fights. In boss fights, just getting damage on them is going to be useful enough. And the fact is, it's not doing enough to be able to really give us any problems. That does change in later levels where they're a little bit more hard, but I never felt the game was really pushing me in terms of requiring me to be a little bit more skillful or think about what I was doing. And that was a little bit disappointing in the overall picture. Now, at the end of each little planet run, you get a scoreboard, and I'm going to pause it right here for a second, just to make a point about the scoring system of the game. One of my complaints about the game is the scoring system. You'll notice on the screen here that the second AI blew everybody else out of the water in terms of points. Part of that has to do with the multiplier it got, although I'm not sure how it got that multiplier, but part of it has to do with my stats. You'll notice that I picked up 5 health packs. That is a negative. It's on screen, it makes it sound like, oh yeah, you picked up 5 health packs, you kept healthy. But in fact, that doesn't help your score based off what I see. And frankly, it actually goes against the game in terms of how it progresses from a gameplay perspective and the design of the game in general, which I will get to when we actually get back to the gameplay portion of this. So after the scoreboard, you get a choice between what level to go to. Sometimes you get 2 planets, sometimes you'll get 3, sometimes you'll only get 1. And the differences between planets aren't as big as I hoped they would be. Granted, you do get different enemy types, and each planet does have a basic type with it. These guys just sort of fly at us. They have a little bit more defense than others, at least from what I see, but they're more physical more than, firing off bullets. Now, one of the strengths of the game is the different planets, enemies, but in particular, the different feels of the areas. Part of that is the presentation, which isn't the best in terms of, you're seeing the brown sort of books on the screen against a brown background. Sometimes it can miss, but the music never misses, which is good in a game that is focused on action and, destroying everything on screen. All the music does keep the energy up, and there were times that I was like, do I know this music? I felt like the music is something that sounded familiar, but when I went back and looked at it, it wasn't. It was just maybe key chords that I have heard in terms of rock songs that definitely came in its own here. I want to use this as another example of the difficulty here. You'll notice that the enemy on screen, yeah, it's firing things, but it's not really doing anything against us because we are all firing at the same time, basically at the enemy, and before they can get anything out, well, it's already destroyed in most cases. And that, in the first half of the game, is consistent. Part of that difficulty discussion comes down to your AI companions as well. The AI companions are, in my opinion, too effective. Now, the thing is that you don't get a choice of how effective they are. In other games with multiplayer elements, you may be able to set the bot level, for example, whether it be they're easy, maybe they're not as good, or hard. But in this game, no, it's just one setting. And they don't run into problems that often. Sure, I had to recover them once in a while, usually when they got stuck in a corner because of a big boss and they were running out of energy, but that was rare. And the fact of the matter is that they were able to take out enemies very, very quickly, and it got a little bit frustrating. I'm going to jump forward here to make my point a little bit more succinctly. You'll notice on the sides of the screen, you do get little warning labels of where enemies are spawning, and specifically, they will appear right at that spot. Not in that general vicinity, right at that spot. I would hope that the AI would maybe take a second before attacking something that appears on screen. Like, it has to recognize that there's going to be something there. But even beyond that, I do wish the game was a little bit more general in terms of where enemies appeared on screen. Give me an indicator that enemies are coming from the top, but don't give me specifically where. Because, unfortunately, that means you can spam that area with fire and get a bunch of them dead before anyone gets a chance to fully react on the enemy side. I think adding a little bit more chaos in that element would go a long way in terms of the moment-to-moment gameplay and having you react to things a little bit more consistently. Also, can I just say this boss design, it off-puts me a little bit. Now, I don't know exactly why it has laser eyes. I would never have guessed it had laser eyes based on this design, but I will give the game credit. It goes out there with some of these unique elements, and it's not apologizing for it, so it does end up having some unique moments where you're sort of taken aback by the game. It's not anything like something like Never Awake where you're like, you know, fascinated by him. It's sort of a, oh, that's weird. Well, gonna shoot it again. I'm gonna move forward here a little bit to the boss battle because I want to talk a little bit about the humor of the game. I like certain elements of this humor. So we have an alien boss that we're about to fight here, and he's basically, take us to your leader. And all the characters are basically going to pass the buck. Like, oh, you know, he's the leader. No, he's the leader. And he's going to be like, I'm just going to take you all. And sometimes it can work. But sometimes it fell flat. Now, granted, the developer here, at least based off his YouTube channel, seems to be based out of the United Kingdom. Maybe some of that British humor is sort of, you know, that dry wit is coming through in terms of the humor here. And I do like British humor, but sometimes the humor here falls flat in ways that feels more language-oriented. Like, the actual words that are used could work if more embellishing language was used, but the basic word was used. What I mean by that is, if something is on fire, okay, you could use the word fire, but you could say ablaze, you could say explosive, you could say something like that. Something with a little more oomph in it. I wish the writing did have a little bit more to that. I also want to point out a pet peeve of mine here. Now, you'll notice on the screen right now, there is no UI. I did not make the UI go away. When there are things in the corners, that UI element disappears. So if your character drives into that corner, it can make that UI element disappear, even if it's not your own. Which could be a strategy if you're playing multiplayer with friends and, oh, do they have enough health or energy? Well, they will tell you if you don't have enough energy and you try to use it via a voice line, but that feels a little bit off. Like, why not make it, like, reasonably transparent so you could still maybe see it? It got annoying, and especially in certain boss fights where the AI would literally hug the one corner so you could never see your own health, and maybe like, oh, maybe I need to go and get that health pack. Over the last 7 to 9 minutes, I have been nitpicking the game a lot, and you may think I have an overall negative impression of the game. I do have concerns, and I do think the game could be a lot better than its current iteration. But the thing about these types of games, the thing about co-op, competitive games like this with beat-em-up / shoot-em-up elements is that it's designed to have chaos with friends. And I didn't experience the game in that element. I did not get, 3 or 4 review copies, didn't request them, and just play with a bunch of different people. But I see the potential there in terms of enjoying this with a bunch of friends, especially friends who may not be experienced in the genre, where they may have a little less, reaction time, or may not necessarily know the mechanics. The thing about these types of games is that it's sort of a team activity in that case, and it's the friends around you that sort of make the game as a whole. The game does have to do enough to sort of bring that forward, to enjoy that, and it does do enough in terms of like the unlockable power-ups and getting a power-up and like seeing yourself have your score just shoot up because you have that power-up. That is fun, and I could see that really working with a series of people who are a little bit competitive but not too competitive. When I think of Steam's remote play feature, aka somebody allowing their friends to play their game via the Steam remote play, this is one of the primary examples where you all come together, you're playing with different, in different systems. It doesn't have a traditional multiplayer system, but it takes advantage of Steam and what it has to offer. That's one of the best features, by the way, that Steam has come out with over the last several years. I have been critical of Steam, but that one I can't be critical of. That is, whoever came up with that, brilliant. Now, I will say this. I'm not going to show you the end of this run. The fact is, there is a spoiler or two with it. But when you beat the story mode, you do get different story paths, and I did appreciate that. I also appreciate that the game also then unlocks a random mode that has more than these 4 fighters. Those crystals that you collect, you unlock new ships that all have different attacks or different, stats. And I did appreciate that because that did go to the replayability. Granted, I also wanted to see... I don't necessarily think the game has a lack of power-ups or anything like that. Far from it. You do get a shit ton of power-ups and different abilities. I do wish I had a little bit more control with that in terms of, like, maybe I just want to turn on, like, secondary ships or something like that. Or, I disable the specials. I feel like a custom mode in terms of this would go a long way. Yes, the random mode does do a bit to change things up. It makes things a little bit more chaotic. But I also like the simplicity of the story mode. And the fact is that I'm always going to be a sucker for the story mode that is Star Fox-like, aka the branching paths and the replayability there. Alright, we're almost hitting the 18-minute mark of this review, and I do need to start wrapping it up because I don't want these rambling reviews to go too far. If you want to see more rambling about a game, go watch me on Twitch when I do stream these indie games. But regardless, in terms of Crystal Comet, a lot of the enjoyment, in my opinion, is going to come down to you and your friends playing multiplayer. I think that's the best case scenario for this game. Is the single player serviceable and you can enjoy it? Yes, but it's nowhere near the chaos that I think the multiplayer element can have. And the fact of the matter is that it's just sort of the base design of this game. I consider this game to be a brainchild of someone who loved Star Fox, beat-em-ups in general, and Turtles in Time. Yes, I know that's a beat-em-up, but Turtles in Time kept on coming in my head when playing this game, especially with that sort of transition screen. It is a game that is solid in the element of giving you a basis to play with your friends. The fact that you can do a Steam remote play and play with somebody else in terms of that, in terms of the co-op element, great. Playing it on a big screen with some other players at home with friends over, yeah, great. But what really does help the game a lot is the fact that I can't think of a lot of games like this that are out there. In fact, I went to Steam and I looked at, okay, top-down shooter with local co-op and local multiplayer elements. There's not a lot of them out there that have the competitive multiplayer element, the score attack element, on top of it. That does make a difference in my buyability rating for it, because if you can't get that experience elsewhere easily, then it doesn't exactly have competition to say, oh yeah, you should go buy that game more than this one. Now, can I give the game a high score? No. The fact is that I do have major issues with the difficulty and everything like that. But for those who love this genre or love to play with their friends, it definitely succeeds in that. And that's why it does get a 74 out of 100. It is not a buy for a majority of players out there who are not familiar with the genre. Maybe you wait for a sale. But for those who love shmups and those who love beat-em-ups in terms of competitive multiplayer, or want a game to play with their friends that is a little chaotic, yeah, you're going to want to buy this. But that does not take into account my enhancer system, which takes the more subjective element of games and tries to match a game to you. If you fall into one of the following categories on screen, add or subtract that score to the main score. If the first digit of your score changes, refer to this chart to see if the game lies in the buyability rating for you. Obviously, in certain elements, you are going to have to make a call in terms of, especially the friends element. That's why there's a question mark on screen for that, because you're going to have to make a judgment based on who you know. Sorry, can't know who you are and what friends you've got and whether or not they're going to be okay with you in terms of this kind of game. Anyway, that's it for this review. Yes, I do appreciate you making this far in the video, and if you like this kind of content, hit that like button, and if you want to see more of this, hit that subscribe button. In terms of the next review, no idea. I did request a couple of review codes for games like Crow Country. I'm hoping to get one of them. I did just receive a game today that's more of a story-based game, but that's due in terms of embargo on Friday, so I don't think I'm actually going to review that game. But regardless, if you want to know what I am going to cover next, you may want to join the Discord. The description below has a link to it, or follow me on Twitter. Anyway, I am working on the Parasite Eve review. I'm still playing through the Chrysler Building because, God forbid, the Chrysler Building. I want to know who developed it. I want to punch them in the face. Regardless, that's it for now. And as always, keep on gaming.